I have here the next video in the Historic Ordnance series. For this one, we're going back to World War II, to the British Islands, to the Home Guard. What I'm going to show you is the Projector 2.5 inch, also known as the Northover Projector. Now, a little bit of history background on this to get you in the mindset. 1940, the British Army is deployed into Western Europe to prevent the German army from attacking into France. May, German forces pour across the border, outflank the majority of the British and French and other militaries in the Low Countries. They end up conquering the Low Countries and they take northern France. The British army gets pushed back to Dunkirk. When they're at Dunkirk, they're trying to get back to Britain as fast and as best as they can. They have to leave the majority of their weapons behind, all of their vehicles, all of their heavy ordnance. So they end up with British troops get evacuated to England and they have very few weapons. Very few machine guns, like very, very few. Single numbers is a lot of what I hear was evacuated. Damn few rifles. Pretty much no anti-tank weapons were even in storage in Britain. There was very, very few of them. Little to no artillery or mortars. And then forget about tanks. They got left in France. So the mother of invention came out and she said, I'm going to help out. People came up with tons of designs on different weapons and munitions that look like stuff straight out of a sci-fi film, especially straight out of Mad Max, and this is one of those. Now, this was designed by a Major Robert Northover of the British Home Guard. He thought this up, came up with an idea for a anti-tank weapon. Best way to describe it. He builds one. He shows it to Winston Churchill. During the testing, it does beautifully because by that point, he's already tweaked the hell out of it. So, Winston Churchill's impressed. He orders it to go into production immediately. Over 19,000 of these are produced by 1943. They're issued primarily to the Home Guard, but there are records that some were issued to the regular British Army and possibly seen service in North Africa and also in Singapore. The reason that people are aware of that is photographs from veterans. However, there are no after-action reports stating how effective this piece of ordnance was in combat in either of those two theaters. Now, these were issued to the Home Guard, one projector per Home Guard platoon. A basic description on this is it's a tube. It's not a rocket launcher. It's not a recoilless rifle. This is essentially the granddaddy for the M79 and M203 grenade launchers. But when you look up the information online, the official description, hollow metal tube attached to a tripod with a primitive breech. Used a black powder charge ignited by a standard musket cap. When I did some looking, there are still some surviving tins for the caps used with this. On the tins it says it was a Mark III percussion cap. And it seems to be kind of a weird issue on this. There's some cans that say there were 10 percussion caps per tin and others that say there were 250. So it probably just depended on the year of manufacture and who manufactured them. The barrel length on this is 36 inches. Overall length of the entire weapon on the tripod with the rear of here attached on, which has your fire controls, so to speak, 71 inches, so just under 6 feet in length. Height, 26 inches. Now, I got a feeling That information is on the Mark I projector. The one that you see here is a Mark II. The Mark I had a four-legged tripod or mount that it would sit on, but it was extremely heavy. Lots of complaints from the Home Guard about that. So Major Northover went through, did an upgraded version, changed the mount to essentially a tripod, and cut down the weight drastically. The weight of the weapon, which I think this is the Mark II version, is 60 pounds. That tripod weighed a lot. I came across some references that the Mark I weighed possibly well over 100 pounds, between 134 and 160 pounds. So he was able to cut out a lot of metal. The crew on this was a crew of 3, referred to as the number 1, who was the commander, the number 2, who was the gunner, and the number 3, who was essentially the loader or assistant gunner. Rate of fire on this, sustained, was 1 round per minute. Rapid fire, you could get off 15 rounds per minute. However, after doing a 15 round rapid fire, you were required to clean out the barrel. How did you clean out the barrel? Well, you were supposed to take a stick, attach a piece of cloth to the end of it, dip that in water, and swab out the barrel to cool it out and clean it out. This is a black powder weapon, so it fouls very quickly. And a piece of trivia for you, this was the last black powder firearm issued to the British military. And it served almost 100 years after its, the previous black powder firearm that served was removed from service, reportedly. Now I'm going to point out down here, this is the crate the ammunition was stored in and distributed in. These are examples of some of the rounds that were fired from it, so to speak. And this little thing right here is the propelling charge. Now, what type of rounds were fired by this projector? First off, the primary round that was fired, the number 76 special incendiary grenade. This weighed 1.5 pounds. It was a thickened glass bottle filled with a phosphorus-based flammable material that when it was exposed to air, it ignited instantly. There were a lot of problems with those bottles breaking inside the breech when fired, so it essentially turned it into a flamethrower. Now, I got contradictory information on this. Some sites say no one was ever injured when that happened. Other sites said there were quite a few casualties with the crews when that happened. To fix the problem, reportedly, the British would wrap the bottles with a plastic type sleeve and put a fiberboard base on the bottom of the bottle. I'm guessing they were wrapped inside the crates and came out that way. This also fired a number 68 anti-tank grenade, which the business end on it was a shape charge. Now on this grenade here, you see there's a little flag which is connected to a safety pin. When that grenade was fired, the crew was supposed to pull the flag, pull that safety pin out of there. When they did that, that removed the block from in front of the spring-loaded, or spring-retained, if you want to think of it that way, firing pin, which was back up in here. When this was fired, and this end hit the side of the vehicle or the target, the firing pin would shoot forward, compressing the spring, and it would hit a percussion cap up in here, which would ignite a booster charge, setting off the shape charge. These grenades were insufficient even for early in World War II Performance on these was 50 millimeters of penetration if it hit the target flat, straight on, and the target had to be within 100 meters of the launcher. So not very effective. The launcher could also fire the number 36 Mills bomb fragmentation grenade. And then how that one was prepped for firing: take the grenade, made sure to keep pressure on the spoon, pull the safety pin. While maintaining pressure on the safety spoon, you slide it into the breech, into the bore of the projector, and then you push the black powder charge in behind it. I do have misfire procedures on this weapon, and there is a difference on the misfire procedure depending on the piece of ordnance that is inside it. Now, the overall cost for this when it was produced was 10 pounds. How much would that be in American dollars? Not a hell of a lot. So this weapon basically was cheap as hell, because as I said, it was a tube. Now, the propelling charge, which I do not have a good picture on this. Down here, I will see if I can get you a better look. I had trouble trying to get this to focus, and that's about as best as it's going to get. Now, you may be able to see here, right above the wooden crate, you see there's this thick black line here. That's actually the front of the propelling charge. That is a thick black piece of rubber. That is meant to push the projectile out of the barrel. And then between that and the priming cap and stuff here on top was other materials which were meant to kind of soften the blow a little bit so that you wouldn't shatter the bottle inside the barrel if you're firing the number 76 grenade. Now, the weight, the actual explosive weight, I was able to calculate. It sounds like this propelling charge had only like 5/16 of an ounce of black powder in it. I was looking all over to try to find information. I found one photograph and I could kind of read a measurement on it. The measurement was really strange. It's an archaic form of measurement that isn't used anymore, and I had to go through and do a conversion, and the conversion came out to around 5/16 of an ounce for the propelling charge. Not much. Now, maximum range on this was 300 yards. The maximum effective range was 100 to 150 yards. This crate down here is a copy of the crate that the number 76 grenade came in. Each crate had 24 grenades, weighed around 53 pounds. When you looked at, I've seen a picture of one that was opened up. Inside here is 32 slots. 24 of those would have the glass bottles in, and another 8, which it looks like are on this side, they look a little bit bigger, is probably where those propelling charges are inserted, with likely 3 propelling charges per little slot inside the crate. All right, get back here. Here's a diagram from one of the manuals. Not the greatest of picture, I know. But you can see on here, you had the launcher, which is just a tube, a simple breech on back with 2 levers. The lever on the left side is essentially the lock for the breech. The lever on the right side you press on that to open up the breech. On top here you have rudimentary sights, a post sight which is hooded in front, a flip up sight back here which has markings on it for 50 to 200 yards marked in 25-yard increments reportedly. Down here on this bar you have the trigger which is in the back here, goes forward, and right here you had a spring-loaded hammer like you would on a percussion cap rifle. And then down here you have the tripod. This is a Mark II. Now the weaknesses on this, and I'm going to mention this before I go into the firing procedures. First off, they were heavy, especially when you consider the range that you got from them. Second off, reportedly the tripods could be damaged easily when dropped, and this is because of the types of piping that they used for the legs. Those would bend. When this launcher was fired, it gave off a huge smoke cloud which gave away the position, and that smoke cloud could last up to 1 minute. It's a black powder weapon. It is not smokeless powder. That is why. Another thing that was noticed, if you use too little black powder, and this could happen because there was like zero quality control, it sounds like, in the black powder that was put in the propelling charges for these. If there was too little in there or it was too weak because of bad manufacturing techniques, you would get insufficient range. If the powder was too powerful, you had a giant pipe bomb right in front of you. And reportedly, Home Guard troops were injured during training with these when some of those propelling charges were just a little too powerful and it blew up in front of them. Now, firing procedure on this. The number one, the commander, would call out, target, this distance, this range, this azimuth. Number two would get behind the gun, get it sighted in on the target. Number three would grab the appropriate munition. He would then open up the latch lever on the left side, press on the right one, open up the breech plate. He would insert first the projectile that was being used. He would then put the propelling charge immediately behind it, closing the breech, and it would lock into place because this was spring-loaded. He would then place the percussion cap over the nipple, and he would say, ready. The gunner, on orders of fire from the commander, would pull back on the trigger bar here, releasing the hammer, which would fly forward, hitting the percussion cap. Percussion cap would set off the black powder charge inside the propelling charge, and it would start pushing that projectile downrange. Now, if there was a misfire, the gunner, the number two, would yell out, misfire! He would then recock the hammer. The number three, the loader, would replace the percussion cap on the nipple on the back of the breech plate. He would signal ready. The commander, the number one, would then yell fire. The gunner would once again attempt to fire the weapon. Now, if it misfired a second time, at that point, gunner would recock the hammer by pulling it back till it locked on the trigger bar down here. Loader would open up the breech. He would remove the cap from the nipple, open up the breech, being careful in case they had a hang fire for some reason, meaning it was slow burning. And then that input of air in there could cause it to spark up fully and go off. The loader would then remove the misfired powder charge and discard it, toss it to the side, out of the way, so it could not be used again. He would then remove the projectile from the barrel. Now, if it was a Mills bomb that was inside there, he would not remove the fragmentation grenade from the barrel. He would leave it in there. He would immediately replace the propelling charge, close the breech, put the cap back on, signal ready to fire, and the gunner would attempt to fire again. Under no circumstances was a Mills bomb supposed to be removed from the weapon if there was a misfire. Why? Because it's a fragmentation grenade. So as soon as that spoon goes flying, that grenade will detonate within 3 to 5 seconds. Now, how was this weapon meant to be used? From what I can find on the tactics on this was meant to be an ambush weapon. So the platoon was supposed to emplace themselves along the sides of a road, preferably near a curve. Why? So that you could put that projector down at the base of that curve, shooting long ways down into the enemy column. And you would have infantry, the Home Guard infantry, lined up on the sides with their rifles, their shotguns, their Molotov cocktails, and whatever else they had available to them. The weapon would fire, giving off a huge smoke cloud. At that point, the 3-man crew is supposed to grab that thing, pick it up, and move out of the area under the cover of that smoke. While that is happening, the rest of the platoon is pouring fire onto the convoy. Now, depending on the ambush that's set up, maybe they'll have a secondary firing position they will go to, load the next round, target, fire. While the ambush continues until everyone is given the orders to fall back, to withdraw. Now, reportedly, some units got really creative with these. They would mount these on sidecars of motorcycles. So you had the driver on the motorcycle, the sidecar had the Northover projector mounted on it in front of where the gunner would be. And it must have been a really interesting mount that they came up with so that it wouldn't rip itself off of the thin metal of the sidecar. Now, my guess is you probably had a second motorcycle with sidecar. That second motorcycle was likely modified as an ammunition carrier. So you likely had the commander was the driver of the first motorcycle. The gunner was inside the sidecar with the weapon in front of him. You had the loader, the number 2 or number 3 man would have the second one. They would come up, pull into an advantageous firing position. You know, you'd get your firing instructions. That loader would grab the appropriate round from off of his motorcycle with the propelling charge, bring it forward, load it in there, fire it. Everyone mounts right back up as soon as it's fired, and they take off for their next firing position. And while they're bouncing over the terrain, getting to the next firing position, that gunner's probably prepping it by pulling off the expended cap off the back of the breech block, getting it ready till the commander says, okay, next position, here's your target and information. Now, these weapons, there's still quite a few of them left reportedly. They're, for the most part, decommissioned. There are still some operating examples in England which are used by reenactment groups. The manual for this is damn near impossible to find because in 1944 the British government instructed Home Guard units to destroy all materials related to this, all the manuals, because the Northover projectors were being withdrawn from service and replaced with towed anti-tank guns, which weighed even more than these projectors, and the troops complained about them even more than the Northovers. Typical way military works. We're going to improve something by giving you something that works even less, that isn't even half as effective. Why do I say that? Because reportedly the type of anti-tank gun they gave them was a 2-pounder, which is not very big bored. So by the time that the Home Guard was replacing the Northovers, they were given an anti-tank gun that was damn near insufficient even at the start of the war, let alone 1944 and 45. But by that point, they didn't need to worry about it because the chance of a German sea landing on Britain was non-existent. Now, has something like this been copied in counterinsurgencies since then? I think it has. I can't be certain. I've come across similar looking setups in some of the stuff from Syria and some of the stuff out of Vietnam. So I got a feeling this was used in other conflicts after World War II. Obviously, a locally home-produced version. Could this thing be upgraded to give it better range and better capabilities? Yes, it could. But you need to take into account, if you're going to increase the weight of the propelling charge, you're going to have to strengthen the breech area on the weapon. Otherwise, you're going to end up like those guys in World War II that got the overpowered propelling charges that turned the weapon into a pipe bomb in their face. Now, is this legal to own currently in the United States? That's the big question, because I've been thinking on this. Technically, it is a black powder firearm that is using technology from the 19th century. So, depending on your interpretation of the law, something like this could be produced and played with, because it's just a black powder firearm. However, the base design on this was created in 1940, which would put it past the date where the ATF says, you know, everything at this point is a firearm. It's past that 1898 date. Also, this thing was meant to expel chemical and explosive charges, which puts it in the realm of a destructive device. However, it's not that much different than a black powder cannon when you think of it. So your guess is as good as mine. I didn't bother looking in the ATF website because I didn't want to get flagged and then end up with a visit from them because I did one too many searches on this piece of ordnance. But we're at the end of the information I have, so I am required to put out the obligatory statement. Because of the question of legality on this, on if you can make one and build one yourself currently without informing the ATF that you are doing it. Do not make one of these at this time. But be aware that something like this could be helpful if you find yourself in a survival situation where we have Russian naval infantry coming up off the coast on the east and we have Chinese paratroopers falling out of the sky. This would be one of those things that you could build, could use, and use to effect to capture better weapons to use against those invading barbarian hordes. But until that day happens, my recommendation is don't do it. Side on a little bit of caution here with this. Now, for all my engineer brothers in the Patriot and militia movements, always remember, essayons.